So there is both biblical and extra-biblical evidence that Jesus fulfills Isaiah's prophecy that the Messiah would come from the house of David. Then Greg and I went from a prophecy about King David to a prophecy that King David himself gave. King David's prophecies about the coming Messiah are in the book of Psalm, including one that predicts details about the Messiah's death. They have pierced my hands and my feet. A fragment containing this prophecy was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls.
We have found a fragment of that psalm beside the Dead Sea that reads or translates, "They have pierced my hands and my feet."
An obvious form of execution that pierced the hands and feet of the victim was Roman crucifixion. There is strong evidence that the Romans crucified their prisoners by nailing them, hands and feet, to crosses. Do we have any archaeological evidence that people were crucified by being nailed to crosses?
Yes, there was found a bone box in Ashuri, and inside it there were found the bones of one individual. He ended his life upon the cross. His heel bones were found with the nails still inside them. It proves beyond any doubt the practice of crucifixion.
There's also literary evidence outside of the Bible that people were nailed to crosses. The first-century historian Josephus wrote as an eyewitness that the Roman soldiers amused themselves by nailing their prisoners in different postures, and so great was their number that space could not be found for the crosses, nor crosses for the bodies. Incredibly, Josephus also wrote about the crucifixion of Jesus. Now there was about this time Jesus, and Pilate had condemned him to the cross. I joined the crowds in the streets of Jerusalem on Good Friday as they commemorated the crucifixion of Jesus, an event that took place almost 2,000 years ago. In the New Testament, the eyewitnesses to Jesus' crucifixion wrote about the nail marks in his hands.
The Greek word that appears there is precisely nail. So Jesus was really nailed. And also you have in the book of Acts, it is clearly said, and the word that you have in Greek clearly says that Jesus was nailed. So you see, Jesus was nailed to the cross, and this fulfills that prophecy of Psalm 22, where it is said that they have pierced my hands and my feet.
David's prophecy that the Messiah would die by having his hands and feet pierced is preserved in a Dead Sea Scroll fragment that is over 100 years older than when Jesus was nailed to a cross through his hands and his feet. Next, Greg and I tested the biblical prophet Daniel. The Old Testament prophets not only give us detailed information about how the Messiah would die, but the prophet Daniel even predicts when. Daniel predicted that the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Cut off is an Old Testament term meaning killed. The city referred to here is Jerusalem, and its sanctuary is the temple. So in about 538 BC, Daniel predicted a significant sequence of events. He predicted first that the Messiah would be killed, and then the temple in Jerusalem destroyed. We know in history that from Daniel until today, the only time that the temple was destroyed was in 70 AD. So in order for Daniel's prophecy to be fulfilled, the Messiah would have to be killed before 70 AD. This is precisely when Jesus was crucified. After Jesus was crucified, is it true that Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed?
Crucifixion took place in Jerusalem around the year 33 of the Common Era. In the year 70 of the Common Era, the temple got burned down by the soldiers of Titus. Titus and his army, his engineering forces, intentionally ruined the entire city of Jerusalem, as well as the focal point of Jerusalem, that's the Temple Mount.
There's no question, right, that the writings of Daniel, including that particular prophecy, predate the 70 AD destruction?
That's for sure. That's for sure.
So the city of Jerusalem and the temple will be destroyed after the Messiah is cut off.
And that's what happened.
So just as Daniel predicted, Jesus was killed just before the temple and Jerusalem were destroyed. After his death, Jesus was taken down from the cross and laid in a tomb like this one. This tomb is 2,000 years old, dating back to the time of Jesus. Today, the tomb of Jesus is protected beneath this massive construction.
Well, buried beneath this mass of construction here is the tomb of Jesus.
There is a very ancient tradition about the location of the tomb and the place of crucifixion, which is in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
This is Dr. Shimon Gibson. He is a secular archaeologist who has personally excavated here in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
If I weigh up all this evidence that I have, the archaeological historical evidence, this has to be the tomb of Jesus. And it's nothing, I'm not swayed by any kind of sort of religious belief here. It's based on archaeological and historical evidence. This has to be the tomb of Jesus.
Finally, I showed Greg another prophecy by King David. David not only prophesied about how the Messiah would die, but he goes on to predict that he would not stay in the grave, but would again know the path of life. You will not abandon me to the grave, nor will you let your Holy One see decay. You have made known to me the path of life. The disciples believed that Jesus was the fulfillment of David's prophecy. Because his body did not decay in the grave, he had risen from the dead. On the third day after Jesus' burial, some of his women followers found his tomb empty.
On the Sunday following the execution, which took place on Friday, the women come to the tomb expecting to see the body of Jesus inside, and they find nothing. It's an empty tomb.
I talked with Dr. William Lane Craig, the author of the groundbreaking book, Assessing the New Testament Evidence for the Historicity of the Resurrection of Jesus.
We have very strong literary evidence for the empty tomb, namely the evidence found in the Gospels and the rest of the New Testament.
In the Gospels, an angel at the empty tomb tells the women, "He is not here. He is risen."
The original explanation that the disciples themselves, the eyewitnesses, gave was God raised Jesus from the dead. That was the message they proclaimed in Jerusalem and were willing to die for.
There is no doubt that the apostles saw Jesus' resurrection as a direct fulfillment of David's prophecy. In fact, the apostle Peter quotes David's prophecy in his sermon and preaches that David died and was buried, and his tomb is here to this day. But he was a prophet, and he spoke of the resurrection of the Christ, that he was not abandoned to the grave, nor did his body see decay. God has raised this Jesus to life, and we are all witnesses of the fact.
The contrast was very clear. Whereas David's tomb was there, identifiable, the tomb of Jesus was empty, his body was not to be found, God had raised him up. And so in the sermons of the Acts of the Apostles, we have independent evidence for the empty tomb of Jesus in these apostolic sermons.
But the literary evidence even goes beyond the New Testament. Again, the first century historian Josephus, even though he is not a follower of Jesus, still writes of his resurrection. Those that loved him at the first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold.
We have multiple independent early witnesses to the facts of Jesus' empty tomb, post-mortem appearances, and the origin of the disciples' belief in his resurrection. And it's on that basis that the majority of New Testament